Well, we are super excited to be with Joe Hobble today in his studio in Houston. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Callie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. The gallery looks good behind you. You're wedged between Joe's.
I am. I have Joe Hobble bronze curtains on one side of me and Joseph Glasgow painting on the other side. I am so excited to be doing this studio tour with you because I have to say, during the time we're in now, one of the things I miss most is seeing artists in person and visiting studios. And the last visit, in fact, the last travel I had from the gallery was to Houston. I make frequent trips there, and I miss not being able to do that. So thank you for doing this virtually.
My pleasure. And I even didn't change things around, but cleaned up today. So I've been working in here, and it's kind of a mess. So it was kind of a mess, but it looks good. Here, I'll switch it around so you can see what we're looking at.
That sounds great.
All right, there. Not technology and phone. Can you see that, Callie?
I can.
Okay. So we're just entering into the studio, the old piece that from a long time ago. That wasn't actually, I think this is when it wasn't made in this building. So this month, actually the month of April, I was supposed to have a show that opened at the Asia Society. And so I pulled this piece out. It's two bronze umbrellas. I'd kept it from, because I'd always loved the piece. So I'd had it since probably late 80s, and it was going to be in this show, which was at the Asia Society here in Houston, that that was going to be a response to Chinese bronzes that were made in the 2nd and 3rd century BC. That are some of the earliest bronzes. They're beautiful bronzes, and I have a number of new pieces we'll see a little later, but that's what that is as we go. But what I've been working on, we'll walk by this big bronze here that you know well, because it actually has a home somewhere out in California, but it's still here in storage while their home gets finished. And I've been working on drawings and sculptures. Some of these sculptures, this is a box sculpture, stack of boxes. You know the ones that have been made before that have been bronze. But what I have been trying to do is to work on some pieces that are the actual boxes and just see what they look like. I'm not absolutely certain about them. Some of them they're kind of like drawings though, and I've been working on them with markers. So you kind of see that on the top here. We'll walk towards this one. So that I've been kind of working it back and forth a little bit, taking part away, and they're covered with polyurethane resin. And so they build up a kind of thickness so they'll have some permanence and stick to them. I'm not quite sure about them yet, but one of the great things about the fact that I've been here over 8 weeks now without going anywhere really, except for walks, is that you can tripped on a cat. You could take time to make decisions about things that you normally can't. So I've been working on those. And I've been working on these drawings. They're related to the drawings that you saw when you were last here that I sent to you, but they're a little bit more empty, kind of in keeping a little bit with the time, I think, without really knowing it when I started them. And these ones in particular, they have bronze elements attached to them so that you can kind of see it probably a little more on this one, so that they have these kinds of forms that, whereas the other ones have always had the oil pastel and the pencil and graphite, these have the bronze added.
Joe, is that a first time you've done that? I can't think of you.
It is the first time. I had these, what happened is we were making on one of the tall pieces that's out there, we had a box, and very infrequently, maybe 3 times in the 20 years we've had the foundry, maybe 4, we have an accident where a mold will split open, and a mold split open, but it gave this very, very fine foil-like beautiful bronze shape. And the box was ruined that was being poured, but those shapes were so beautiful that I just held on to them. I thought I'd probably use them in a sculpture at one point because I'd done that once before. And then I just decided as I was working on these drawings that I would attach them to the drawing. It seemed that the physical nature of it went really well with the rest of the materials, and also seemed to mark something specific about this particular time, that I'd have enough time to come to that conclusion and make that consideration. I'm pretty happy with this set of drawings.
I love it. Do you consider them a triptych? I mean, they make a great triptych, or are they individual?
No, I think they're a triptych, and what I've been doing is triptychs and diptychs. This is diptych. That's probably a little bit more like the drawings. The light's not particularly great here. It's a little more like the drawings that were sent to you. Again, though, that have to do with calendar markings in a paper calendar. But again, sort of more empty and open. So I've got finished during the 8 weeks. I finished 3 diptychs and this triptych. But it's been, you know, I'm pleased. I think they look pretty good.
They're great.
All right, so touring the studio. And you know the studio well. The studio is an old church that was it was built in 1948, and then it was turned into a used auto parts place in very Houston fashion. And then it was abandoned for 7 years before I bought it. And we fixed it up to have a foundry, and I live upstairs. So I've been working on these other, I think this is probably the best of the actual box pieces.
So you say it's cardboard, and did you say cardboard and polyurethane?
Yeah, what I've done is I've taken the cardboard boxes and I've stuck them together with polyurethane, and then I've coated it with multiple coats of the same kind of polyurethane that I've used for casting books and so forth. So it's the UV resin resistant, the UV resistant permanent resin, so that it'll have strength, and it will, you know, the surface will stay the same, and yet underneath that it'll have a cardboard so that the evidence will still be in the original boxes. Was just a way to try to be, again, give it that quality that you might have in a spontaneous drawing. Otherwise, you know, this is brand new. It's a little hard to see probably there, but this is a big box piece. It was made before the pandemic and cast before, but just had gotten finished and brought into the studio. The idea of the box pieces are evolving. This one particularly is more complex in a certain way, but it also is very simple in the way it opens up, and I'm really pleased with this piece. I'll show you a couple other ones related to it that came out of the same group.
I love that one. It looks like it's just kind of barely sitting on the pedestal.
Yeah, they're very delicate now. This one is also from the same group. It's a simpler piece, but I think it has some of that same fragility. And we've started to work on some new cardboard ones that will then be cast once we're back in operation. So this is a cardboard one that's been put together that I feel really quite good. This one I feel is done. So when some point, you know, in the next few months, as the pandemic comes down, we'll cast this piece. And there's another one over here. I'm not as sure about this, but it has some good qualities to it. And again, it's in cardboard. It's still under consideration.
Okay, I have to ask which cat is walking around right behind.
Well, this is Riley is right here. Riley?
Aww.
Riley? Hey, buddy. Yeah, Rouse, what's up? Riley is, there are 3 cats that belong to the foundry, but because we're social distancing, we moved the cat boxes and they're feeding into my studio, because then my studio has an easier access to outdoors than the foundry does. So that they're sort of, they've moved in, they've taken over really.
Oh.
So otherwise, you know, when I first started with the pandemic, first day of lockdown here, in the morning before I locked down, I went and picked up these 6 plexiglass boxes that I decided to make. I had some hope and desire labels that it left, and I thought I was done making the series, but I thought that maybe during this quiet time, not knowing how long we'd be locked down, that maybe making some things with hope in them wasn't a bad idea, and that there were new patterns that I had never made, that I hadn't used, and that would be a way to get rid of some of the sense of anxiety and focus on something that was more positive and hopeful. As I started working on these. So they're patterns that are related to what I've done in the past, but different. I'm pretty happy with them. At first I wasn't quite sure, why I would make them. There are five of them are hopes, and one of them is a desire, which I kind of like throwing the desire in. But at the beginning, not quite knowing how to respond to the pandemic, they were pretty calming, actually.
Very calming.
I still don't know how to respond to the pandemic, but at least I'm more used to it now.
And are those, Joe, 24 by 24?
Yeah, they're 24 by 24. They are.
Got it. They're very, they're very meditative, and just to give a sense of how densely packed they are individually, approximately can you describe the label? It's a clothing label, a silk clothing label that you have.
Yes, it's a clothing label, and here's an example how you can read it on the edge. Can you see that? You can read hope. Okay, so it's what it is there's a book that I was in. There's a cat in front of them right now who really thinks they're interesting. But there's a book that I've used in a lot of my work, particularly earlier, not so much recently, but called Dream Songs by John Berryman. And when I made these labels, I photocopied out of a first edition copy of the book, The Dream Songs, which for me was one of the first books about art, maybe in high school, that I understood. I mean, it's a book of poems, but it's one of the first things I understood about being an artist. And so I photocopied a word out of it that I think can, taken out of the context of the book, have an impact that seems strong and as meaningful as they do when they're in the book. Then I sort through a gazillion colors until I can match a color in a word, so that I think that there is a kind of intensity in poetry. And so in one way, I make each label as a one-word poem, and then I order them from a shirt label maker who actually is in Dallas, and they weave them for me. They're the size of men's dress shirt labels, fancy dress shirt labels. And so, and then they ship them to me, and they're double woven taffeta, silk taffeta labels. Then what I do is I slowly take them and repack them into these boxes in a pattern. And depending on how I pack them, you can shift the color and change it. And I make some places, I make a little bit of the label show so that you can understand that there is a word there. I want you at first to be impressed by its abstractness, and I'm using modernist patterns. A lot of them are these days related to Solowitz, either directly or fairly directly. And each one of those boxes has about 11,000 labels packed into it, somewhere in that range. So I'm pretty pleased with these, actually.
I think they're fantastic, and I can already imagine different configurations, whether they would be in a single line like you have them sitting on the floor, or 2 rows of 3, where horizontal rows or vertical. Would you be open to different installations with them?
Oh yeah. They're sitting here as they are, just because I do think they make a good group together, but they're sitting here just because this is where I lean them when I finally finished them all and put the backs on them. And it was important to use the same color for those 2 words. I thought that desire was a form of hope. And so that was the initial reason that hope and desire labels were the same color. I think interestingly, when you look at it and you notice that it's desire, which we're going to look at right now, down again, see what you're looking at. You can see that it says the label's desire. And so it's the same color, it's the same kind of pattern. It's woven completely across the back, which some of the labels aren't. You know, and it's the most turbulent of the pieces. The other ones are calmer, which seem appropriate. So, yeah. What else do we have here?
Okay, Jeff, I saw one thing in the background, and it looked like shirt collars in a circle, like a half dome, and it's not a piece I'm familiar with. So I'm so curious. Sorry, it's like I see these little glimpses of things. I'm like,
no, here you go. Here you go.
What is that? I saw that in the background.
It's exactly what you said. So I was in a show in Istanbul, and I made 3 of these collar pieces. This one's the one, I made a white one, a blue one, and one that's sort of graphite dark. This is the bluer one, which it's hard to see in this light again, but it has tinges of blue on the edges of the collars. And so that these 3 were not a triptych, but I wanted the 3 pieces with just the color differentiate them. They're cast like the original collar pieces directly from collars that have had wax infused in them that have been tied together, that we then cut into sections and cast. And the patina that you can't easily see here, but I'm very fond of this patina, very light kind of blue tactile patina on these dark collars, and it ties them together really nicely, and it's very painterly in a subtle sort of way.
Well, I was wondering, thank you so, oh my gosh. And then can you talk about one more piece?
Yeah, I talk about anything.
The piece that's right in front of us, it's bronze and resin. And I love the way that looks in the studio, and the light, it just looks, it's a magnet. It's like, what is that?
Well, you know that this
I know
piece, that this piece,
I know what it is.
You helped place it back in this is the one that goes to Pebble Beach, that you helped place in Pebble Beach at the house. So for a period of time, I worked quite intensely with books. A lot of my work has literature as a reference point, but what I wanted to do was deal with the book as an empty vessel. And so I started to make castings of the books. And initially they were bronze, but then I determined that it was interesting to have access to the inside, and we would cast them in resin. And so this piece was cast with a bronze base and a resin top. The idea with the bronze base and then the resin top is that during the day you would be able to see both, but at night, if it was lit, the lighting on the clear resin top makes it glow as if there's an illumination inside of it. And that if you lit it from both the sides, it would look like it was floating rather than sitting on anything, because the dark bottom wouldn't pick up the light so much. And so, so your initial impression would be like a floating set of books, and during the day it would be anchored back down with the bronze. These are Sotheby's catalogs from the 80s, based on a Bernini column that is at the Vatican, that holds up the altar in St. Peter's. There's 4 of these twisting columns, and it's about the same proportions, although it's not the same height. They're a little taller. They called up a canopy over the altar. Well,
Joe, thank you for the tour. I was wondering if you could flip it back to you, because I've got a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much for the tour.
You're welcome.
Fantastic. So tell me, how are you juggling your days, and what are things like in Houston? And you mentioned kind of how you're doing social distancing at the studio. Do you have any idea with your calendar as far as when you'll be casting again? And
we're maintaining social distancing, but Todd, who pours with Ken and works in the foundry, is returning. Ken King, who runs the foundry here, Todd Bailey, who's an artist who works a couple days a week with Ken, is returning next Monday. Ken and he are going to still continue to work in different or separate spaces and protect themselves. But there's a big backlog of pouring that has to happen, and that's going to happen on supposedly a week from Monday. So that's that schedule. Things, the museum that I work for, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, reopens for members on May 20th. At every entry point, you will pass through a mechanism that will take your temperature. And if you have too high of and you have to wear a mask, and there will only be select entry points open. And so when you enter the museum, you will, if you don't, you'll have to have a mask. And if your temperature is too high, you'll be asked to come back at another time when your temperature is lower. It's not foolproof, but it'll work. And the school will open the same time because we have an exhibition that was only open 3 days before we had to shut down the school. And that's the annual core show. And we extended it till the middle of June. So it'll have about a month, a little bit less than a month run. So that's the work side of things. It's a crazy time, and things are opening slowly. I have asthma, and so I don't usually have problems with it, but I try to take care of myself. And so I haven't been really going out. I've gone out for walks and so forth. What I've been doing is I get up in the morning, I exercise, I balance my day between studio and schoolwork. I have a friend here staying with me, who's working remotely, teaching, and we're just kind of hanging out and doing the best we can right now. So it's not been terrible. The first few weeks was anxiety producing, primarily because of the job.
Right. Well, you're making some fantastic work, and it is an exciting time. And I want to thank you. In the midst of all of this, you packed up some fabulous drawings and couldn't ship them to the gallery, but you shipped them to my house, and I brought them here to the gallery, and I'm looking forward to doing an installation here that will document, but I'm thrilled to have the new drawings. I'm excited about your show that we're hoping to have for you in January. And I can't wait. I can't wait to be able to come down to Houston and see the studio in person again and see you again sometime soon. But most importantly, everyone's staying healthy and working hard from home. So yep. Thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too, Kelly.
I'll talk to you very soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.